agencies, saying the permanent solution would be a region-wide water system. Also, we're hearing from New Orleans Mayor Cantrell and Jefferson Parish President Cynthia Lee Shang coming up which areas have been impacted with the saltwater wedge and how you can prepare.
From Fox 8, this is breaking news.
Good afternoon, I'm Liz Reyes. At this hour, we are following breaking news. President Biden approving an emergency declaration for Louisiana as local officials deal with the saltwater intrusion from the Gulf. The White House making the announcement just moments ago. This is Southeast Louisiana battles the saltwater intrusion along the Mississippi River that is contaminating the drinking water. Governor John Bel Edwards requested the declaration on Monday for 4 parishes: Plaquemines, St. Bernard, Jefferson, and Orleans. Meantime, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers telling Sewage and Water Board officials in New Orleans saltwater has not, I repeat, has not reached just south of the Belle Chase Naval Base. Leaders renewed a call for the people that live at the base and nearby, however, to conserve water. The New Orleans Sewage and Water Board urging people, don't panic. Andres Fuentes tells us how the city plans to keep fresh water flowing. Andres.
Right. The plan that the city's agencies want to move forward with would link the city's water system to water intakes upriver as far as the city of Kenner. The Sewage and Water Board, Corps of Engineers, Homeland Security, and other agencies gave their presentation today in front of the city council about the saltwater intrusion. Now, they propose creating a region-wide water system that would draw water far enough upriver where there is minimal worry of saltwater ever reaching it. The agencies have been in talks with both FEMA and the state to see if they can get any funding and reimbursement for the project that could total near $300 million and take about a month to construct. Officials argue it would be the best permanent solution for the east bank of the region as we continue to see droughts in the Mississippi River Valley. Here's more details about the project from the council meeting.
Start the pipe at Carrollton, pause at East Bank Jefferson Parish and hook them into it, and then continue further upriver. We can kind of do, for lack of a better term, off ramps all the way up to start drawing water into this immediately, which I think would benefit the schedule on this. Ultimately, the end of this would be near Kenner, near River Mile 120, 115 to 120 area.
The configurations, how things end up, where they line up, we haven't answered those questions yet, but I do want to assure everyone we've been in very consistent and regular contact with Jefferson Parish, and we want to be sure that we're doing everything that we can in lockstep with them to provide maximum regional benefit.
And again, that plan is for the east bank of the region, but for West Bank, New Orleans, emergency officials say the water treatment plant in Algiers will rely more on desalination and reverse osmosis when water barges actually make their way into the region. Now, officials also say that they are constantly monitoring that drinking water in the city, and as of right now, there are no traces of salt water, but they say that they will keep citizens updated if it is ever detected, either by text message alerts, social media, and media outlets like Fox 8. Back to you, Liz.
Thank you, Andres. Jefferson Parish President Cynthia Lee Shang saying that the water in that parish is safe to drink right now and that it's working with local stores, encouraging them to stock up on bottled water in the coming days. That saltwater wedge expected to arrive in Jefferson Parish in 4 weeks. First hitting Gretna October 24th. The parish president says there are 3 intakes in Jefferson Parish where residents get their water. Of the 6 municipalities, the only one that provides its own water is Gretna. It produces about 4 million gallons a day with about 17,000 people served in that area. The West Jefferson intake is for people on the West Bank and serves about 30 million gallons a day. The East Jefferson water intake produces about 40 to 45 million gallons a day. Now, the parish president saying that she wants to remind everyone that there is not a hurricane where this is not like a hurricane situation where the entire Gulf Coast from Texas to Florida is trying to buy water and gasoline. So she stressed that today. And she says it's important that it's a very isolated situation right now for parishes in the state of Louisiana. And the parish president in Jefferson Parish stressing we can do this. We can deal with this. We do have drinkable water and she says she is certain of that. Cynthia Lee Shang also says Grand Isle will not be a concern, as that they'll be able to turn on the pipes at Lafourche. Jefferson Parish continues to help Plaquemines Parish. In the meanwhile, it's providing them with 100,000 gallons a day, and they also have the ability to do more. Mayor Cantrell says the city will help neighbors downriver.
The inundation with Plaquemine and St. Bernard, the City of New Orleans, our Sewage and Water Board have been activated in helping our neighbors, and we're continuing to do that.
We are continuing to follow this saltwater prices in the metro area. We've got some updates for you as well online on fox8live.com for you to get some more details.